Just welcome everybody who's here for our Activism 101 training number 2. Thanks very much to everybody who got this going. My name is Ray Ward. I'm the director of the Wolfenden Center. And shout out to Jess, who's handling the Zoom today, and to Ryan, who's controlling the PowerPoint. And a special welcome to Daisy. I'll welcome Daisy a little more thoroughly in a second, but if we go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about this this activism training that we've been doing. Last time we talked a little bit about what is activism, what does that look like, and what's your activism personality. We went through 6 different activism personalities, and that was thanks to Ryan leading us in a discussion on that. If anybody's interested, we've got a link to a Stanford survey that you can take that'll help you determine what of these 6 categories maybe best fits you. We talked about a researcher, an organizer, a doer of service, a philanthropist, a policymaker, or an entrepreneur. These are all ways to get involved in this thing that we call activism, which is really a way to look for social change, right? To acknowledge that a lot of the problems that we face aren't immediate problems. A lot of them are big, long-term problems with roots and causes that go way beyond what we see on the surface. And ways to make change aren't as simple as, say, painting a fence. It can involve policy, it can involve laws, it can involve movements of people larger than you might be able to reach in person. And so we're looking at ways to harness that power. After you figure out where you might fit into this process, we look at telling your story. So Nia Mapp was on campus. Nia Alvarez Mapp visited us through Zoom to talk to us about the importance of sharing your story. And her kind of main points were that there's no such thing as bad activism. Get involved. There might be things that we don't think people should be advocating for, but at least they're involved in the process. And we're looking to get more people involved in that. And she really encouraged people to be motivated from the things that you love. She asked people to consider what they care about, what they love most, and to use that as the source of their activism. And ended with telling your story, that the way you communicate the things you love and the goals that you want to pursue are shared by telling your own story. And she called those sacred conversations. And we had people share those conversations with each other. And it was noted that that's really a point of vulnerability, where you reach out to somebody and you open up about the things that you most care about. But in that vulnerability, if you can find ways to do that, there is power and bringing people together about the things that they care about. So that's just a very quick catch up. That was Activism 101, the first meeting. And now, Ryan, if you'll advance the slide, we'll go to today. So today we're talking about the next steps in this community organizing process, finding allies and power mapping. And I'm so happy that we have, I couldn't imagine a better person to talk about this with. We have Daisy Rodriguez in the room. She's a graduate last year from Cabrini. Right now she's working with College Possible as a high school senior coach in a year of service, and is looking at grad school ideas after that. She was also a leader of this effort called Power University, where Cabrini University and 3 other Catholic universities in the area partnered with a community organizing group called Power, and really was on the ground floor of launching an effort to train college students in the philosophy and methods of community organizing. A veteran of that, she was also a Pierce Fellow for 2 years. I feel like 2.5 years, because she was half of a Pierce Fellow without having even had that fellowship while she was at Cabrini. Co-founded the Food Recovery Network at Cabrini, and we'll learn more about this later today. She started the Cabrini Swipes Out Hunger program, which involves students being able to donate meal swipes to feed hungry students. So if we could just take a second to welcome Daisy to campus, back to campus. Thanks so much for making the trip, Daisy.
Yay! Welcome back, Daisy.
Got some love in the room. I just want to acknowledge people on Zoom.
Daisy.
We've got Julie, Shayna, G, Vinayak, Ashlyn, Kate, and somebody else who's on their phone. So welcome everybody. I'm sure we've got some folks in the room there as well. It's my time to stop talking and hand it over to Daisy so she can start talking about finding our allies and mapping out the power in the room and beyond. Daisy.
So you just switch to the slide. So yeah, so as you guys have heard, based on your past previous trainings, power mapping and finding allies has everything to do with telling your story. So this is just one extra step that you're going through. So finding your allies is really about finding those individuals that you can connect your story to process and continue to fight for what you're looking for. The better way to explain this is basically having those one-on-one conversations that Nia talked about, and being vulnerable in the situations, and then connecting that to who you are as a person. So before you find your allies, you really have to assess who you are as a person, what assets do you bring, and who do you know, which has everything to do with power mapping. So where you start is your assets. Who are you as a person? So I'm going to use myself as like an individual because I know myself better than everybody. But basically, I know that I'm a great organizer. I love planning. I'm very detail oriented. But when it comes to the more creative aspects of things, that's kind of where I lack. So when I started thinking about finding people who are my allies, I started thinking about people who are more creative than I am, because that's where I lack. And then by sharing my story about why I'm passionate about what I'm fighting for, it allowed that individual person to connect to my story and my passion. And that allowed them to become an ally, someone I can count on when I'm in a corner that I need that person. And that kind of goes back to power mapping as well. So when you're thinking about power mapping, you go on to who is it that you need to convince to achieve your goal. So if your goal is you want to change the cafeteria menu, who is it in your university that you need to talk to? So that's when you draw your power mapping. So the individual you need to change, and then the individuals below those person who are already on your side. So the students are probably on your side because they also want the cafeteria to change. And then who's against you? Maybe whoever wrote the policy in the first place, they might be not completely for you because the policy is already written and they probably think that's best. So who on your side is going to help you achieve that goal? That and like a bunch is what finding your allies and power mapping is. And then we'll go a little bit more into each individual one. Yeah. So building your team. So the first thing that you do with building your team is, again, going back to that initial one-on-one conversations. And I'm pretty sure Nia went really into deep about what those conversations are. And it's literally just sitting in a room with a friend and talking to them about what makes you vulnerable. So I know Nia's passionate about voting, and the way she did her one-on-one with me to kind of get me into a team was basically share her story about voting, and then connected that to my background because she knew me. So finding your ally is probably a little bit of the easier part of activism because you know your friends the best. So you know where you can kind of have those one-on-one conversations and who you're looking for. So it still goes back to assessing yourself and what you need so that you can reach out to individuals who also can basically individuals who can give you that aspect that you're missing. So like if right now I needed to make a meeting with Ray, which is probably the most difficult thing I know, I wouldn't go directly to Ray because he's busy, he has a lot of things to do, but I would go to Megan because she's my ally, she's the power person who I know will connect me to Ray. And that might be just going to Megan and sitting down with her and having a conversation on why I need a meeting with Ray and why it's important, and then her doing what she needs to do on her side to make that meeting happen. I know people talk about like it's really who you know that make or break anything, and I think that's very true in activism. You really need to make those connections and build your army in order to do what it is that you want to do. And then people power. So your power is in sharing your story. Your voice is going to be your absolute best skill and best asset at all time. So sharing your story, you're giving power to not only yourself, but you're giving power to the people that you're talking to, because your story has power and your passion has power. So when you share that, you're motivating people to rely on their power and their voice, and that kind of creates this like space where power is being shared by your allies and your individual. And you know, an army is built by the many people that you surround yourself with. So what is power? There's basically two different types of power. So power over people and power with other people. So the power over people is kind of like, everybody knows, like your boss just telling you what to do, because they have power over you. To where power with other people is the same as sharing your voice. You have power in your voice, so when you share it, you're sharing that power that you have with another individual. And that's how policies are made, that's how change is made. You have to be a collective to make things happen, and you have more power with more people. Yeah. So as Ray talked about earlier today, you need a piece of paper and a pen. So you're going to draw this map if you don't already have it, and you are the center of it. So this is the first thing about finding your allies and finding your power. So you know your story, you know what type of activism you are, and now is you have to assess yourself. So in the circles, you're going to talk about the things that you already have, the assets that you have, the powers you have, and how I talked about, it could be like you're creative, you're very friendly, you know a lot of people. If you're a philanthropist, you have money, so that's your power. Your story, your voice, anything that you think makes you unique, that makes you an asset, is what should go in these bubbles. So we'll take about 2 minutes to do that.
So you want to see and say question and say
Like your assets, basically like what you bring to the table.
A lot.
I just wanted to chime in. A lot of this is going to depend on the particular goal or challenge that you're working on. So this is, it's good to kind of think generally, but then I think Daisy's going to run us through a case study where think especially about what assets you would have, especially people assets, right? Like friends or connections that you have that would be helpful in obtaining the goal that you're working on. But yeah, I mean, Daisy, if you wanted to move to the next steps, people could kind of keep that in mind as you talk about your case study.
So yeah, so we'll jump straight to the case study, and we'll go back to the power mapping. I don't know if you have one minute. Yeah. So as Ray mentioned earlier today, one of the goals when I was here, I'm going to start with just telling my story. I come from a low income family, first generation. My mother is, my mother migrated to the United States when I was about 8 years old because I was diagnosed with leukemia, and education here, the medicine here was just better. So when we migrated here, my mother went through a lot of struggles because she had to pay my medical bills. She was moving to a country where she basically didn't know too many people, and it was a struggle. So one of the things that we struggled with the most was probably food insecurity, where we just didn't know where our next meal was coming from. And there was many times where my mother would skip on meals in order to make sure that her kids and myself were fed. So because of that, she joined the army to give us a more better, stable family. So things were good after that. However, once I came to college, I kind of fell back into that trap of being food insecure again. And, 1 in 4 college students suffer from food insecurity. And I just happened to be one of those people. And I found it hard to ask for help because of the stigma that comes with it. And the fact that I couldn't really ask my parents because my mom was a single parent. She was already struggling financially. She was putting me through college on top of my brother who was also starting college. So it was just too much, and I didn't want to ask her for help. So instead, I reached out to a professor I felt very comfortable with, and he taught a class here all about food insecurity. So I felt very comfortable sharing my story with him. And because of that, he kind of helped me. Due to me reaching out was kind of how the food pantry got started with this professor here on campus. So even though I wasn't directly involved in making this happen, my story motivated other people to pursue this action. And it kind of trickled down to the food insecurity, the food recovery network kind of being brought to campus, which was like an additional help. And during a conference, someone else was sharing the story about food insecurity as well. And they told me about Swipe Out for Hunger, which is a nonprofit organization that started in 2015. And what they do is that they donate meals to students who are categorized as food insecure. And it works very different in different universities. And I wanted to bring this back to my campus because I thought it was something huge and it really should help out. And due to a class had done a survey of Cabrini students to see which students would qualify as food insecure. And out of 1,000 students who took the survey, 40% of them ended up being food insecure, which is actually the national average. Between 35 to 40% of students in a 4-year institution are food insecure. So it was surprisingly because we're such a small institution, but not surprisingly because national statistics kind of support what we found. So in order to make this plan happen, I had to really assess myself and what I can really realistically do to bring this program here. So one of the first things that I looked at was, what can I do to make this happen? So obviously I could share my stories. I knew I was a good planner and I had an organizational skill already based on the fact that I had already started another club here on campus. But I also assessed who my allies were. And Ray was one of my biggest allies because he introduced me. Well, he extended the Pierce Fellow to be able to cover this program, as well as connecting me to other mentors on campus. And this is kind of where power mapping comes on. So you have to find out who your person is who can change this policy. Now, for me, I knew that this program came down to money. The cafeteria would lose money from these swipes that students would donate, because even though we get 14 meals a week if you have a meal plan, they already account for 2 of those meals you not using, and the university pockets that money that funds other programs like the arts, our theater, our library. So the university would eventually lose money if students would start to donate this program. So I knew it came down to money and how we could go around this issue, which is why I knew the person I wanted to talk to was the VP of Finance at our university. So the first thing I had to do was see who is below him that can kind of become an ally with me, because I am a student at the end of the day. So I need someone else who can kind of give me their power so that my voice is heard better, so that we're sharing this power. So I also needed to look at the public's influence, so the students on campus. So I did another survey for the students on campus to see if, even if this program got started, who would actually donate a meal swipe, who would be able to donate one, and then on the other side, what students would actually participate in this program and actually go and get these meal swipes that we're gathering. So it was a two-step public interest. Now the survey turned out that about 95% of students would donate one meal, and about 65 of the students who do categorize as food insecurity would actually choose it, and that has a lot to do with stigma and privacy. So that was another thing that another person I had to convince, which would be the dean of students, because the dean of students would be the person who would hold these meal swipes and have control over them. And that's kind of where my power mapping was. I had 2 enemies and I needed to find a lot of allies. So I found allies in Ray, Megan, my mentors. I found a couple of teachers who would support me. And after gathering all the research and all the support of my allies, I went to the dean of students, which was my first step. Now, it actually turned out in my favor because he was looking for a program. He had seen the surveys, so he was already looking for something to kind of expand. And so bringing him, he went from an enemy to an ally, and bringing him to my side helped me expand my program way more, because he knew the university's finance better than I did. He knew what the university would be okay with letting go and what they can receive for it. So my plan went from bringing this type out for hunger, where students donated, to a program where staffs and teachers would actually donate money as well, which would duplicate the amount of money the university would get, so they wouldn't lose as much money. But it would also benefit the students, because now they weren't only receiving donations from a student, but they were also receiving donations from teachers. Now, the real person we had to convince was the VP of Finance, because he controlled the money. He had basically down to it, he had the final say on whether this program could live on our campus or not. And so then again, I had to go back to the drawing board and trying to find the people who had the power, who can give me the power. So now that I had the dean of students on my side, I also had every person who he had a connection with, who he believed was on my side as well. And that was the VP of student life and public safety and the cafeteria. So now I went from just being me, my friends, and Ray to where I went to also having the dean of students and multiple directors of campus who could give their opinions and kind of brainstorm more how this can possibly live on our campus. I think the final thing that kind of pushed everything into motion was when we gathered all together, sitting in one room, because I had a lot of meetings with all these people individually. And a lot of the time I came out of the meeting feeling like this wasn't going to happen. It was just a lot of no's, a lot of, you have to think about this, you have to think about that. And in my mind, all I can think about is those students who are going hungry. And I wasn't looking at the bigger picture where my allies were looking at the bigger picture because they had a more broader scope than I did. But once we all sat down together and discussed this issue and combined our powers, we were able to formulate this program where the students would donate one meal one semester for these 2 weeks. And what that means is that students would donate that one meal, and then faculty or staffs can donate $7, which would calculate to what one meal cost would cost at the CAPS corner. And in order to keep it anonymous based on public opinion, these meals would get donated into a Cabrini ID, basically, which was brought on by public safety since they control the IDs. And in these cards, they would have all these meals where students would go to the dean of students, grab the ID, and they could swipe it into the cafeteria. So it's very anonymous. It looks like an ID, so no one would know that you're on this program, but you were able to do this. Once we brought up this final version to the VP, he got on board, he agreed, and we run it as a trial in January of 2020. It ran for 2 weeks of donations, and we got 300 donations based on students. So 300 students donated one meal. And then we had a lot of good donations from faculty and staff. One faculty alone donated $500 for meals. And he was one of my biggest supporters since the beginning of this whole process. He was kind of the person I brought the idea to. And he donated 500, and then other faculties and stuff would donate 7 or a little bit more. And we even had students who didn't have a meal plan who would also donate the $7. And it kind of branched out a little bit more past students and faculties. Some of our partners through the Wolfington Center and some of the partners of people I knew that I had shared my story with had even donated as well. So at the end of the day, if you calculate it into meals, we had 700 meals that were donated that could be spread out between 67 students that were our target students that we identified as high risk food insecurity that could be spread out this semester. Now we started the distribution of meals, but then COVID happened, so we went home. So we haven't really done statistics on how successful this program was. But at least it's in place. It's something that has proven to work at Cabrini and has worked at other universities as well. That's kind of how I did my allies and power mapping in a short period of time. And then also one thing to note is this doesn't all happen in a short amount of time. This happened in the span of a year and a half. So it's something that took a lot of time. So how activism in real life is, it doesn't happen from one day to another. It's a lot of planning, a lot of meetings, a lot of sharing your stories, a lot of finding your allies and mapping out your goals and your power mapping, and then putting everything into action.
That's awesome. Some people I know might have a couple questions about this. Maybe we'll take their questions and then we'll run through the two little forms that people could use for doing some of this power mapping.
Can I ask one question, Ray?
Yeah.
Does this still exist? Can we still donate to this? Because I didn't even know about this last January, and I feel bad not knowing about it. I mean, I know about the food pantry because it's in our office, but like, I don't think I knew about who knows what I was doing last January. But Daisy, incredible. I'm so impressed with your hustle and the long-term goal and what you were able to accomplish to bring to your fellow Cabrini student. I mean, what an incredible story.
I second that.
Wow.
Yes. So as in the moment, it's kind of paused because of like all COVID and the cafeteria. But I'm hoping and I'm pushing for it that by the time that some normalcy comes to the campus, we can start it up again.
I should say too.
I definitely applaud you for that because I'm also a first gen, low income, and I know to the point where sophomore year, I had to get rid of my food, I had to get rid of housing just to make it, just so I could just graduate and to see this program. It really almost brings me to tears because I know I struggled with food to the point we had like a beggar's corner where people kind of beg for like meal swipes and things of that sort just to eat. So I applaud you on all of this, but so is this still continuing here then? Or is it just, you said it's on pause?
Yes, on pause.
Okay.
Yeah, it's something I hope to, as an alum bring back. I should also mention that alum office was like a huge ally for this as well. And they opened it up to alums as well for donation wise. I can't take all the credit. Like the idea was definitely brought by this panel that I was involved in for the conference, Universities Against World Hunger Conference. And some of my panelists had heard about this idea and were involved in it. And it's kind of like generated my thought about this. And I definitely heard way crazier stories about food insecurity in this panel. And honestly, sharing your voice and sharing your story is kind of what kind of put the fire in me to like, I want to do this as well for my campus, and I want to be able to be that person who generates the same confidence and the same power that they have given to me. So yeah, I would definitely check out their conference. It's not happening live this year, but it's on virtual, and it happens in March, and they're amazing ideas about how to fight world hunger and specifically college hunger as well.
And thank you. Also, thank you for the heads up about the food plan thing. I never knew that they expect students not to eat all that food. So thank you for that shared information.
Are you planning on expanding that program?
I hope to. I know we agreed in the beginning that students would only be able to donate one meal a semester, but it was kind of in the hopes that if this program does succeed and alums and staff would be able to donate more, then that would kind of cover the deficit of students sharing more other meal plans. Like I know myself, once I got over the hump of being food insecure and I got a job and I had like other income coming in, my junior and sophomore year, I was definitely one of the students that my meal plan was basically going to waste because I would eat in the cafeteria like maybe like 3 times out of the week, and most of my meals, obviously I had friends who are not supposed to do this, and hopefully I don't get in trouble for sharing this, but I definitely would give my idea out to my commuter students, like my commuter friends, just so that they can use my meal plan because it's going to waste. And even though I knew that those 2 meals that they were saving was kind of generating this additional fund to like other things that are very important on our campus, I still felt like meals and food was probably one of the things that we should focus on more than a very nice building.
Yeah.
So I'm going to jump in because I know this is a crazy rich case study, and this is part of the reason why I really was hoping that Daisy could be with us today. But we want people to practice this on other things. So I think, Daisy, if we can jump back to those two kind of maps that we can draw, even just to think about, you know, what are the assets that Daisy brought to the table, or
Yeah, so this is kind of the power mapping I was talking about. As you can see, like you have your public interest, so like your media, your general public. And I didn't mention this at one point, but I did reach out to a couple people who were had more public influence than I did, such as like the Lookworder here, and they ran a story with that. So thank you, Ashlyn. I know you're on the call. And then personal influence was like the people I knew I had influence over, because I was involved in other campus activities and other leadership positions. I knew that I can kind of put this in other people's ears to kind of gauge them more into like being an ally and being in support of this. And then obviously the VP of Finance, which was like the person I was kind of fighting to get this, like, you know, being more successful and more starting. And then you have your financial influence. So in this situation specifically was the alums, because they donate a lot of money, and then staff and faculty who could also, again, initial donation. So, and this can look very differently depending on which decision you, which goal you're fighting for. However, your public influence and your personal influence is always going to stay the same. It's just the people underneath it change based on like the topic that you're going to, and the people you're fighting kind of against will also change based on like what you're going for.
so I think we should transition to the case studies. Although I just want to mention Daisy, Ashlyn, sorry, link to the story in Lookworder, which excellent. Like it's all coming together. But yeah, Daisy, why don't we shift to the two other possible case studies?
Yes. I think that's the one. Yeah, that one. Yeah. So basically, in this situation, we're gonna break out into two groups. Obviously, the one virtual and the one in person. And we're gonna do a case study. Basically doing the same thing, accessing you, and then power mapping the people who can change these goals. So these two case studies would be a couple of semesters ago, we talked about cultural competency training for staff and students, but actually making that into a class or a mandatory training. And then another case study could be providing free COVID testing active reading for students who are attending here. So we'll break down to two sessions. We'll do the power mapping, and then Ray will obviously take the in-person, and he'll take COVID, and I'll take the mandatory staff cultural competency training.
Yeah, we can actually let people in the room decide which one they want. But we'll do the breakout room now for about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and debrief, and that'll be the end of our time together. All right, and I'll paste into chat.
Are we doing 5 breakout rooms with 2 people in each?
No, sorry, could we just do, we'll put all the people that are online, apart from the Cabrini Zoom account, into one room, and we'll all be together.
Awesome, okay.
Thanks, Jess.
So I'll walk around so you guys can hear me better. But did you guys want to do the COVID one, or did you want to do the cultural competency training? Can we do the cultural one? You guys want to do the cultural one as well? Yeah. Right. Did you want to do the virtual reset? Yeah.
Ray, you're muted.
Everybody who's in who's virtual should go into one breakout room.
Okay.
So I mean, what you could do, you could just turn off the camera and mic for the room, and we can all just turn on our mics and be together here.
So yeah, so the first is the mic off.
Yes.
So now they are in a separate. Okay, yeah. So basically the first step to this is your goal. So our goal is definitely to do a training for social consistency for all faculty and staff, mandatory. I think this is something like all universities need, and that they should definitely have. But does anybody have like a specific story about why they think this is something that Cabrini could benefit from?
I can go. It's funny because I'm currently getting my second master's right now in higher ed. So this is one of my papers right now about mandatory cultural training within the higher ed education. I always wondered, will we have as many racist and sexist people in the world if we mandatory training, and especially diversity training within the higher ed? I definitely think it's mandatory because the world's diverse. You can't ever expect everyone to be the same as you. Even when it comes to ability, cultural, race, sexual orientation, things of that sort, I know no one's going to be exactly the same as me, so I should educate myself for my diverse classroom setting.
Yeah, that's very true. And as I'm like listening to your story, I'm also assessing
No.
like what you're bringing to the table, which is something that your allies are always going to do. As they're listening to their story and they know your goal, they're going to be like, how realistic is this? Is it something I should get involved in? And even though it's hard to say, but like, how am I going to benefit from being a part of this? So it's like you said, the assets that you're bringing is the fact that you are on your second master's. This is something that is going to affect you directly, but also the fact that you've done research on this. So you know all the statistics, you've done all the research you need, which is something you can share with other people. And if I'm looking at the room, the assets that kind of other people do is Ryan and Andre.
Andres.
Yeah, so Andre and Ryan, they both work with students who come from very diverse backgrounds as well. And Megan, as being in the Wolfen Center, which is social justice center, is always going to be directly involved with students who are in need, with students who come from diverse backgrounds and have a very social justice motivated. I have no idea what you do. But
A lot of people say that. I work in facilities.
in facilities, okay. So you still work directly with students who come from diverse backgrounds and need different things.
Yep.
And then you guys are students who are like benefiting from these trainings and these cultural consistency trainings that teachers would give. So in order to make your goal possible, you're gonna need to see who is going to be on your side and who's gonna be on your side, and who do you need to convince? Ultimately, who does it come down to? So if you guys want this mandatory training, who do you guys think is gonna be the person who's gonna make the decision on whether this should be a thing or not?
Can I just say something? Anytime you have mandatory, it goes over like a lead balloon. Because we have to do trainings all the time, and I never put mandatory because everybody, they get their back up on it. So, because we have to do safety trainings and we would say, oh, it's mandatory. And I noticed I stopped putting mandatory in there and I got a better reception. People don't like to be told what to do. They really don't.
So what do you think would be better than saying mandatory? Because you still want it to be something that everybody takes in order to continue to have a job.
How about required?
I don't know. I that's the thing. I don't know. I just put nothing. I'll just say safety training, blah blah, and strongly encouraged or whatever.
Please complete by this day.
Like we weren't here for a good number of weeks when the campus shut down, and my concern was, I want to keep these guys engaged because obviously they're not here. But I sent them all these links to the safety things that they, just refreshers, that kind of thing. Now, I'd like to think that they went through every single one of those trainings, but I don't know. But I just try and encourage.
I think a smart idea would be to separate it, put it a little bit more ahead than the other trainings. Eventually they'll come to realize like, why is that training all the way over there? It just makes sense to have it over there. So now they're complaining about it being further than actually doing it. So
Okay, yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, so then going back to who the person would be to make this decision, because it involves staff and faculty, who's the person who basically would be in control of this? And Megan would probably know.
I'm just thinking it's HR, is it
Yeah.
not an HR?
Yeah. Yeah, so it would be HR, because in order to have a more mandatory without having the word would kind of have to come from HR, because it would be basically a condition of your employment at the university.
Well, then it would have to be people that are coming into, like for existing employees, I think if it's part of onboarding, that's one thing. But for other people that have been here 25 years, that's kind of hard to.
I think it still might be needed because and then out of my emails, I write she, her, hers. And I've already had several faculty members come to me like, what does that mean? Why do you write? And it's like funny because I feel like the younger generation understands what that means, but the older ones might be a little bit tapped out to the new. And I think that's why it should be mandatory because the world is always changing, always becoming more diverse, and you should be up to the layman's terms and at least the correct terminology to call people.
Mm-hmm. And this is kind of where compromise starts to set in, because you want to get a part of your goal achieved, but you also have to be willing to give something to get something. So if you're really thinking about it, one of the ways that you could go about this would be like how, say your name again? Mary. Yeah, so to Mary's point, you would have to make it mandatory for people onboarding, but just have multiple training sessions for people who are ongoing. And in order to make it sure that everybody does it, you would have to create a reward system or something that would encourage people to continue to go to these trainings and actually use this practice in their classrooms. That's kind of like where power mapping is. If you're just you by yourself, you wouldn't know that putting something mandatory would kind of scare people off. And you also wouldn't know the fact that onboarding process and people who are already here is very different, which is why finding your allies is very important when it comes to activism, because you don't know everything and you just can't, because you're not in the position, you don't have the knowledge or the experience to be able to make these calls, which is why having power over people and power with people is very different. And knowing that difference really does make or break your activism power, because you don't want to be the organizer who's just telling people what to do and not getting anything accomplished, but you want to be someone who's sharing the power with other people who have a little bit more experience than you, have different assets than you, and getting things accomplished. So activism is really hard to say like compromise, because you shouldn't have to compromise. Your goal is your goal and it's gonna help better everything. But there's always the getting something on the paper and then coming back and reevaluating it and changing it to where at the end of the day it's gonna look the way your program is supposed to look from the beginning. But you have to start somewhere. You have to really get into it. And how Nia said, like, there's no bad activism. You have to start somewhere. You have to achieve some type of goal in order to come back and reevaluate that again and again and again. So your first form of this cultural accountability training might look like it's just for onboarding. But then the next year after that, once everybody who's coming new starts to share about how progressive this training is and how beneficial it is to them, word spreads and the public interest, the public influence starts to become bigger. And now more teachers are like, oh, I want to be up to that standard. I want to see, I want to be at the same level than they are. So then some of them might start actively looking at these trainings themselves. And it's something that you can like avoid the mandatory kind of through. But it's hard to like look at what you can and can't do in these types of situations. And then besides the HR, there's also another person that can make this. There's also another way that you can make this more mandatory. Do you guys think of anything, like another direction that you could go?
I mean, the president of the university just came to my mind.
Yes. So the president and the board of trustees can change policies at a university a lot better than HR can, and it's more firm coming from the president and the board of trustees saying at the summer everybody has to take this training. We have multiple options for everybody to take it. You have to take at least one of them. Now, the president and the board of trustees are a lot harder to get to. You know, you have to have more allies in the stepping stone. So like your VP of internal affairs or the president's secretary, even if you just know one person in the board of trustees, like I know Jose from diversity is on the board of trustees. So it's making sure that he's also on your side and your ally, because he's in the room where you're not, like Hamilton Sims, he's in the room where it happens. So like you have to make sure that you are getting those allies who can push your voice a lot more further than other people, than you can yourself. And it's also like when you have these sessions with people, when you're finding your allies, you find different ways to tackle the same issue. And there's nothing wrong with tackling the problem in different directions, if at the end of the day, you're still getting to the same results. So sometimes when, I'm gonna go back to an example. Nia did the voter engagement at our university. Basically, she's the one that started Cabrini Votes. And when I joined the group, me and Nia had a very different approach to how voter engagement was. She kind of dealt with more like going into the classrooms and giving presentations about how voter engagement was ultimately going to help out, to where I did more of the tabling, more of the one-on-one conversations with students to try to get them. Like, neither approach was wrong, they're just different. But at the end of the day, we still got to the same conclusion. We still had power in our voices. We still had allies individually and with each other. And that's just another way you can tackle. So you could do both. You could go directly to the HR person and try to see how like HR can help, and then you can have your other allies like Jose, who can go directly to the board of directors, the board of trustees and the president. And they might meet in the middle. It might be like something that Jose has said to the board of trustees, and the board of trustees be like, this is really something HR should do. And even though you didn't get to where you wanted with the board of trustees, you still got a firm person now who is the person who can change the policy and make your goals happen. Yeah, that's like a quick example. I don't know if we're done.
Yep, so Ray, so that we can close the room, it's gonna close in 35 seconds and I'll be back. Good job, Daisy.
Thanks, Daisy. I actually have to get back to my box.
Oh,
Thank you.
well, we're making it mandatory that you stay.
Well, you'll have to talk to my boss about that then. I don't think it's gonna fly.
Thanks for coming here.
All right, thank you. 6 feet.
Oh, hi, Ryan.
Is there any-
Hello, Ryan.
I'm not here.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. We've only got not much time, but we really to do some debrief. So, Daisy, do you want to help maybe lead what you talked about in the room there?
Yeah, so we did the cultural activism training, and what was your name again? Simone. Simone shared her story about how this directly affects her and her work, in her work career path. and kind of gave us the motivation. And then we opened it up to who's the person that, beginning power mapping, who's the person that is going to kind of basically be the decision maker. So we landed on 2 different paths that you can take. So HR was the first one, who can make these mandatory trainings. And then either the president in combination with the board of trustees. And then as we were discussing different options, some roadblocks came into play, as in like, you can't really make it mandatory for the people who are already on campus, but you can for onboarding process. And then the fact that putting something mandatory might basically discourage other people from doing it. So wording issues and trying to get through that as well. So we ultimately decided that our program would have to adapt to that public influence, as in like everybody who was onboarding would definitely be mandatory, but then it would be encouraged for staff who were already here by having multiple sessions throughout the year, and then having a reward system for people who complete the trainings. That's kind of where we landed.
Awesome. All right. It sounds like they're cleaning up the leaves over there. Is that what's happening?
Oh, yeah.
All right, we can hear a little bit of that here. And then does anybody from our room want to share a little bit about what we talked about?
Vinayak, you share. You had a good plan.
Yeah, I think he should speak too.
Okay. So we were talking about the COVID cases on campus and how we can have mandatory testing for the students. So we kind of talked about how the first thing would be to identify why it's not already a thing. It seems really obvious. It's happening in a lot of other universities. So why isn't that happening? And the way to get to that answer would be to reach out to colleagues or friends who are on the COVID task force and try to see what were some of the reasons why it wasn't part of the task force plan. Of course, finances could be a reason, but there could be many other things, and it may not just simply be an easy kind of solution of like moving money from somewhere else to another. So kind of first identifying the problem, then trying to see in terms of chain of command who to approach about that problem. So if it's finances, then it's like the person in charge of finances for the university. If it's something else, then identifying that, and then really doing our research, right? We have to we can't just say that we really need this, please do this when it's not possible. So doing the research and trying to present a plan saying, this is why we think that that COVID testing free for students is going to be really, really helpful. And in the long term, these are the benefits. So that's something that we talked about.
Awesome. All right. And I know we're running up against when this meeting is supposed to end. And I have to learn to give us a lot more time for debrief, because this is where it gets rich, right? I think these were compelling cases that drew people in and got people fired up. And that's what we do this organizing for, right? That's why we do activism, because there are some pretty simple things. I mean, the organizers I talk to talk about the stop sign, that the stop sign is that typical case of like, it's a simple thing. My kids are scared because they can't cross the street. Can I get a stop sign here? And how do you do that? This is the same kind of thing that we're talking about here. I think the cultural competency training thing is a live issue, and that's something that I hope continues in conversation. But I think we had common themes here, right? That we're figuring out the thing that we care about. We identify the person or persons that can change and make that happen. And that's not an instantaneous thing. That takes a while. That takes research to fully appreciate the situation and find out who those decision makers are. And then find out what's going to convince them to say yes to this. And so if we can see the next slide, I just wanted to point ahead to what's coming next. That's when we come back in January, that's what we're going to be talking about. How do you set up those meetings? How do you find your decision makers, set up those meetings, conduct that meeting, and then bring into the other part of the conversation those public actions. If you do need to bring pressure to this, or you want to raise awareness, or you're looking for more allies, you bring this public. And it goes beyond that one-to-one discussion and into marches and demonstrations and that sort of thing. How do those fit into the equation? So that'll be in January. There's going to be plenty of that stuff going on in January, so it's fitting that we start talking about it then. In the meantime, I just want to thank Daisy for sharing her story and for all the stuff that she did at Cabrini to make it a better place. And I know she's continuing to do that in Philadelphia. So thanks to Daisy. Big clap.
Thanks, Daisy.
Thanks, Daisy.
And if we can advance the slide one more time, I just want to thank all of you for attending, taking the time out of today. Please be safe as we go forward. If you have a chance, please do give us some feedback about what happened today. I think, I'll paste that into chat. But if you just go to bit.ly/Wolfington feedback, you can find us online there and give us some notes. So please do share with us your thoughts about today. So thanks again to everybody who made this happen. Thanks to Jess, thanks to Ryan, thanks to all of you, and have a wonderful day.